This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Carlton McCoy. We'll talk to Carlton about wine, the wineries of LWE, and a lot more. We'll taste a Haynes, Chard, and the Trailside for our weekly wine sips. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Straight out of D.C., Carlton McCoy made his grandma proud, receiving a scholarship to the Culinary Institute in New York, studying to become a chef, eventually moving to New York City and back to D.C. to work in some of the hottest restaurants, including Aquavit, Per Se, and City Zen. His love of food started shifting to wine, and Carlton headed west and hit the slopes in Aspen at the legendary Little Nell, rising to beverage director and also receiving, after studying, his Master Sommelier certificate. Carlton met Galen Lawrence Jr. at Little Nell, where Galen brought him in to run storied Heights Cellars in Napa. The fun just begun when Galen and Carlton started Lawrence Wine Estates and acquired Burgess Cellars, Stony Hill Vineyard, Haynes Vineyard, Lascombe, to name a few, and founded Domain Estates, a fine wine import and marketing company. Carlton McCoy is also the co-founder of the Roots Fund, a nonprofit organization aimed at creating educational and employment opportunities for Black and Indigenous individuals in the wine sector. That's a tongue twister. A lot of stuff in that intro. That was one of my bigger intros. There's a lot to fill in, and we'll get to that.
Sure.
I was, your grandmother and culinary. There's a lot in between there, and we'll talk about it.
Well, yeah.
But I want to welcome you to the Grape Nation, Carlton. I'm very happy to say that we're talking to Carlton in New York City. We're sitting across from each other because you're in town. Why are you in town?
So we were invited by Antonio Galloni to partake in his Venice Icons event. He's been a huge supporter of the work that we're doing in Napa and now in Bordeaux. So we'll actually be on a panel featuring our wines from Haynes this vintage, which
Nice.
he's fallen in love with that project.
And, Antonio covers the wine world, but
Yeah.
Antonio himself covers Napa.
I think
So it's
that
a little more intimate as far
I
as
think
your
he's
winery.
been, in my opinion, the most influential voice for Napa in recent times. People often give credit to Robert Parker, but I think where Galloni's intellectual mind goes, he's I think sort of caught the Napa Valley up with other regions, focusing on the unique terroir of the places instead of just brands.
I agree.
Yeah.
I got juiced early on by Parker
Yeah.
and got a little weary, and that could be a whole separate show. But
Yes.
I totally agree with you on Antonio. And it's nice to be invited. Not everyone gets invited.
That's
so
correct.
It's
It's
nice
very
to be on a
small.
short list. Yeah.
I mean, we're really blessed. I think part of it is because we have such a unique ethos in our enterprise. We're often not directly competing with other producers, and we have our own little niche, which comes with pros and cons.
I think he sees that, recognizes it, and appreciates it.
Yeah, he's been around long enough.
All right, so we have a lot to cover here.
Yes.
Really a lot. But I want to focus on a few things, like talking about a little about your childhood in DC,
Yeah.
how it shaped you in your
Sure.
future, because it's certainly an interesting story. I want to talk about your journey in life and wine, and mostly focusing on some important stops like Per Se,
Yeah.
Citizen, Little Nell.
Mhm.
I mean, those were places
Yeah.
that really. And then, because I have you here, I want to get your take on some general wine stuff.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the wines, the wineries, the
Yeah.
business, your philosophy and all of that. All right, so let's kick it off with the first thing that I mentioned. You came from a pretty tough neighborhood in
Yeah.
DC. What's ironic is it also isolated you from what was going on in the world,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, what was in front of you was really what you saw, and a lot of other shit was happening all over. So
Yeah.
tell me, I mentioned your grandmother,
Yes.
and there was, tell me a little about that so
Yeah.
people get a context.
So I was born in DC General Hospital, right in DC in 1984. If you know much about DC in this time, this is really the height, I would say, 1984 through about 1995 of the most tumultuous and violent time in DC. And it was the middle of the crack epidemic.
Right. Was Marion Barry the mayor?
Correct.
High
Very,
profile
very
guy, right?
Yeah. I mean, DC was in utter turmoil. It was run like a third world country. And I was raised in Southeast DC, which is the toughest part of the city. I dealt with everything that came with that. It was not to over dramatize it, but it was not uncommon for me to be in middle school and one of my friends to be like shot dead just walking home from school.
Okay.
This is actually, unfortunately, very normal at the time. I don't think I knew a single person who, if not both, one of their parents were strung out on drugs. And I was really blessed to have my grandmother in my life. Both of my parents were heroin addicts. My mom died when I was 2, which is 3. And my dad
So they
was,
were a product of the environment.
Yeah, I mean,
most
it was
of their lives.
Yeah,
it hit them hard.
Both highly intelligent people, which is the sad part when I look back, not just in my personal situation, but as a country, what we allowed to happen
I
to.
know.
My mom was born and raised in New York City. She was Jewish. I'm half black, half Jewish. Her family, her mother was the Farberov family. They were Russian Jews.
Farberov?
Yeah. And Ellis
So
Island cut it to
Eastern
Farber.
Europeans, Russians.
Yeah, so her family name was Farberov. At Eastern Island, they cut it to Farber. So she became the Farbers. And her father were the Goldfinger family from Hungary. They were Hungarian Jews. Their families came over in the early 1900s with persecution of the Jews, mainly in Russia and Eastern Europe. And they set up a life in New York City. So she was raised in New York from a really great Jewish family. Her mom passed away when she was young and really traumatized her. She never really recovered. She met my dad in New York City partying in the late 70s, disco era, and they both got into drugs and it went downhill from there.
I'm curious about what was his story like. What was he doing?
So my dad was born and raised in D.C., Northern Virginia area.
But they met in New York?
They met in New York. So he was a crazy kid, much like I was when I was younger.
How old are we talking now? How old was he when they met?
This is probably in his late 20s.
Okay.
And he got into some trouble when he was young, which is sort of normal. But what I'll say is getting in trouble when you're young in a nice neighborhood versus an impoverished neighborhood has very different repercussions.
It's hard to get away from
you can't, you don't really, there's not a lot of opportunities, not a lot of chances. It's sort of like one strike and you're done, especially at that time, being an African-American young boy, and which DC is really more southern than people realize.
Right.
And especially in Virginia. So he ended up going to the Marines, because back then, if you got arrested, you had a choice, which was go into the service or go to prison. So he chose the service. As you can imagine, dishonorable discharge, the turmoil didn't stop there. And he got into drugs, and that became a big part of the rest of his life. So when my mom passed away, my dad was still in the streets. My grandmother, who was a Pentecostal preacher, took my sister and I in. And she was the only
This
parent.
is your dad's mom.
Yes, and she was the only parent that we really knew, and she was a really great example of what it meant to be a great human and to sacrifice yourself for other people, because she did that her whole life. I come from actually a long line of female preachers. My grandmother took over the church from her mother, whose mother had started another version of the church in the South. We were raised going to church 5 days a week. It was Pentecostal, so very intense church services. So it was a bit of a juxtaposition between.
Were you rolling your eyes every morning, or you kind of here?
What you have to understand is, especially like the black churches, is as cultural as it is religious. So it's a meeting place for the family, the community. We ate there, we did everything there. So it was a bit of a safe haven in those times in a really dangerous neighborhood.
That was actually a big break for you, because
Yeah.
you got pulled into that, and I guess the strong forces of your grandmother and the community kept you.
Yeah, I mean I succumbed to some of the sort of street life, because it's part of, for a short time in my life, my grandmother sort of reeled me back in. Without her, I would definitely wouldn't be sitting here. She's by far the most impactful human in my life, and I always look back as well as just as an adult, you start to understand the sacrifices that your parents made when you get older and you're living life, and you realize it. And she really did. She treated everyone in the church as her children. We at any given time would have 2 families living with us. So my grandmother slept on the couch because she gave a bedroom to a family.
Selfless.
Yeah, I never saw my grandmother sleep in a bed. We had a 3-bedroom house. My sister and I shared a room, and the other 2 rooms were taken up by families who were evicted from their homes. And when she would help them get on their feet, another family would come in. And that was just how I was raised. Big meals. My grandmother cooked for everyone.
Was she a good cook?
Exceptional. My grandmother had recipes.
With the preaching came the community.
Yeah.
And with the community came bringing people in, I would guess cooking for them.
Yeah, and
at home, at the church.
It was just what I knew. My grandmother was a really well-known cook. She had recipes published in the Washington Post, and but she was really well known for that. So it sort of ingrained in me the importance of the table, of meals, and how you can nourish someone. And be selfless in the impacting it have on their lives.
Did you take to that? Stand by our side and help her, peel a million carrots?
I was an odd kid. I loved the kitchen. So to give you an idea, my grandmother was one of 12 children, 8 girls. So I was raised in kitchens with all of my great aunts. So it was me, this little light-skinned, mixed black, half Jewish kid, in a kitchen with these 8 older black ladies cooking.
That's
weekly.
Crazy.
And I absolutely loved it because they treated me like a little prince, and they would just feed me. And I was this chubby little kid, and I learned how to cook from that incredible community of black women. And I didn't know that would lead to a career in the restaurant industry.
How did it?
So I had dropped out of high school twice at this point, and
Why? Just distractions?
I was.
Was it ever hard? It wasn't the academics.
Never hard. Right. I excelled in school, but I was bored.
Right.
You have to understand, in those schools, a lot of the kids are highly traumatized, very distracted.
Was it not such a great school because of where it was?
None of the schools in D.C. were
right. That's what I figured. So no break for you
there. The teachers were spending their time babysitting kids instead of teaching. So the work was very easy, and I just got so bored I stopped going. So I get kicked out of. You play basketball. You do anything but go to school.
With your grandmother a little more because you had time, or not?
Oh, she didn't know.
Oh, okay.
No,
okay.
There's no way that would have worked. And so I finally was welcomed back to DC Public Schools. So they kicked me out for truancy, and I came back, and I was trying to get my life together. My grandmother was obviously very impactful in me getting my life back together, and. There was a program called CCAP that's actually still operating. It's based out of New York City. Richard Brosnan started it. He's a legendary guy and has changed thousands and thousands of people's lives. He's an incredible man. And they had this program they had just launched in DC from the New York chapter. And I was in a cooking class, which they had because I had to have a certain amount of electives to graduate. And the goal was just graduate from high school, which is a big deal in my community. To graduate
Was
from
it
high school.
home ec in those days?
It was one of those sort of things. Yeah. But
It
mainly
wasn't
cooking.
as evolved as like culinary or cooking.
No, we didn't use those words.
Yeah.
It was, so I was in there, and the chef Ian Bartley was from the Caribbean. He went to the Culinary Institute of America, and was a pastry chef in DC. And he was one of their mentors that volunteered his time to go into these schools and mentor kids. And he recognized that I had talent because I knew how to cook at that point, which I always took for granted. I just thought that every 16-year-old knew how to cook, which they don't.
Cook for 100 people in
Very
church.
easily. I knew how to do that. Yeah. So he recognized that, and he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, look, I work for this program called CCAP. We do culinary competitions for people to win scholarships. Would you be interested?" And I go, "Sure, I don't care." And he went to my home, met my grandmother. My grandmother said, "You're doing this because there's no other path for you to go to college, and I definitely can't afford it."
Yeah.
So he took me under his wing and trained me, and I won the scholarship to go to the Culinary Institute of America. I won the cooking competitions.
So you went a full ride?
Full ride for 2 years, yeah.
So that's the first influence, grandmother, and then this guy really had a
completely
impact.
changed my life.
So we're sitting here, you're running a wine estate, so there's a line we have to connect.
Yes.
So you go to CIA for cooking, to become a chef?
Yeah, and I took it very seriously. Like, I was a complete geek. When kids were out at cake parties, I was in my room studying Alain Ducasse, and I loved classical French cuisine. And on the weekends, I would come to New York City, take Metro North down, stage for free in almost every weekend restaurants.
Everyone there had the opportunity,
yes,
but you were on it every time.
I loved it because I also recognized the opportunity. I didn't come from a place where people had those opportunities. So
how much did you know what was going on? New York is this culinary capital.
I had no
There's
clue.
A billion great restaurants. Diversity.
I had a friend who was really into it, and he's like, "Hey, you should come down with me one time." And I go, "Sure." And it just opened up this crazy world because I'd only been in New York City once before in my life. And the fact that I could just go down, and all it cost me was a train ticket. And I was working full-time during the week in kitchens in Hyde Park. So I'd saved up some money. So I would just come down and find a couch to crash on Friday night. Saturday night we'd go, and then we'd come home on Sunday for class on Monday. And I absolutely loved it because you got to work with the great chefs. At that time, New York was still the dining hub for the country. And, I could work at Alain Ducasse's house. I could work at Jean Georges. That's when I was introduced to Aquavit. I could work at all these great restaurants, Restaurant Danielle, and it didn't cost me anything, and I could learn. So I took it very seriously. But when I was there, it's required to take a wine course to graduate.
At CIA?
Yes. And
I interviewed a guy up there who wrote the fat book, Michael.
What was it? Weiss? Yeah.
And there was another
Stephen
guy.
Colpan. So I had Stephen Colpan.
Both good guys.
Loved Steve. I really took to him, and the way that he connected food culture, history to wine culture. It was that was really more of the ethos, and I fell in love with it. I love history. And again, it was this whole other world.
So another guy
that opened up
whose
to me.
approach kind of hit your sensibilities and kind of engaged you more.
Oh, and I loved it.
But was that a point in your life where it's like, maybe the wine thing
not really
is complementary or a career? You didn't
just
think of it that way?
No, but what sort of triggered it is, so when I graduated, I moved to New York City, where all young cooks wanted to work at the time. But where I really struggled was, unlike a lot of the kids that had financial support from their families and things, I didn't have that. And when I graduated, my grandmother passed away a few months after I moved to New York. My sister never graduated from high school. At that time, she had 2 kids. So I'm now 22, having to financially support my family, and that was never going to happen on a cook's wage. So I had a really tough decision, which is I had to move to the dining room,
Front of the room,
which I initially didn't want to do.
So that was more by circumstance than initial desire.
100%.
Wow.
And I was actually really ashamed of it. I sort of intentionally lost contact with all of my friends in New York because I didn't want to tell them that I moved to the dining room.
That was your
I also
foundation.
I didn't want to explain to them why. Because at this point, very few of the people I knew about my home life and how I was raised. I was still young and sort of ashamed of that. And so I took a job in the dining room. My first job in the dining room was opening a craft steak in Tom Colicchio.
All right, so let's get to the
Yeah.
point. I stated some objectives here.
Yeah.
So we did the childhood, the influences. You finished CIA. Now I want you to, not quickly, but swiftly, give me that path. You get there, the restaurants, wine, all the moves and everything.
Yeah, so I was honored enough. Stephen Coleman called me and said, "Hey, you did exceptionally well in this class. We're given the opportunity to give out a few scholarships for people to go spend time in Italy, traveling around wine regions. Would you like to go?" So I did, which is, I look back, it was crazy. I had no money. I quit my job.
Had you been out of the country before then?
Never in my life.
Jesus.
And
which parts of Italy?
So we went to Piedmont, Emilia-Romagna, and Tuscany.
Nice.
So I quit my job with no money and went on this trip for about 2 or 3 weeks to Italy. And it just invigorated this thing, like being there, meeting the vigneron they did an incredible job of connecting, again, their history and culture as a country intertwined with wine as this thing that wasn't separate from their food culture or their identity.
Especially Italy.
Yeah, so I came back and it really it excited me. So I
Can I just two things? I hate
Please.
to interrupt. Was there anyone on the trip with you that is somebody notable in the business or not? And do you remember any person or winery then that still resonates?
I didn't know enough to know these people
to file anything.
And I remember these experiences at Banfi at the time in Montalcino, and them tasting us through the different clones and the different climats they source from, and I was like, this is wild. I just thought as wine is like wine, right?
Right.
And they just what they did was they sort of removed this veil, this whole other layer of learning that I didn't know existed. And the way my mind works, it was I started geeking out. So I got back to New York. I was blessed enough to get a job at Per Se, which was one of the greatest restaurant experiences I had. And
Per Se is literally.
I had the balls to apply.
We just talked about your background.
Well, I was working in a dining room for 4 months of my life at that time. I just applied. I sort of what do I have to lose? I needed a job, and they interviewed me. They loved that I had experience in culinary because.
Who was the wine guy there?
At the time, Andre Mack had just left.
He did.
And Jimmy Hayes had taken over. But there was Ezra Eichelberger, who was the head sommelier. I mean, it was just a really cool gang. Raj Veja was a captain there at the time.
You was?
Yeah. He was, I always noticed him walking around with these wine books. I'm like, what are you doing with these books? He's like, I study wine. This is in 2007, maybe. And so I was like, that's really cool. So I started going to the wine classes they would give for the staff. Just for studying SIG.
I'm curious. You became sort of this voracious reader and information input guy. Were you anything like that as a kid?
No.
No. Okay, so It was in you, but you weren't doing it.
I needed to find something I was interested in.
Right.
So I worked at Per Se for a couple of years, and then I moved to DC to open Cities.
What did you leave Per Se as? I
was an expediter, which is one of the hardest positions if you know how it's set up at Per Se in the French Laundry. The expediter position it's a grueling position because your job is to orchestrate the whole service in the dining room and coordinate it with the kitchen and all the timing and everything.
Is it a runner in a way, or
no? It's you're literally you're orchestrating the entire service. So between the dining room and the kitchen, everything, all the timing.
It sounds like the least fun thing.
I loved it. It was so intense.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying you did it.
No,
but
it was sort of a thing.
Not the most romantic.
Most people didn't want to do it.
Right.
Because it was really hard.
There's a reason.
Yeah, but I loved it. So I moved to DC to open Citizen with Eric Ziebald, who Eric was the chef de cuisine of the French Laundry for 9 years, in arguably the most important time, which is in the beginning. He worked in DC at Vidalia, got a job at the French Laundry before anyone really knew what it was. And he was Thomas's first chef de cuisine and ran the kitchen for 9 years. And he opened a restaurant, the Mandarin Oriental, in DC.
Did he know you only through you were at Per Se?
Correct.
Was there, you didn't really work together?
That was it. No, we didn't work together.
And I guess he heard good things?
Yeah, because of course he called the team there. And so I came down and I started working at Citizen, and they had a wine director by the name of Andy Myers, who's still a close friend and also a master sommelier. And over time, he I went to him and I was like, I want to learn more about wine. And he was this old school, like DC punk rock kid. And he's like, yeah, you and everybody else, kid, And I said, no, I'm serious. And he's like, well, you need to buy these 6 books and you need to read these books. And these are huge reference books. It's like Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia, things like this.
Hugh Johnson. Like
yes,
Parker's
the wine.
Bordeaux
Exactly.
Book or something.
So I read all of them, highlighting, and I came back to him. I was like, I read those books. He goes, you read all those books? I go, yeah. He goes, those are reference books. He goes, look, if you enjoy doing that, you'll be just fine. So he put me on the path to the journey of being a master sommelier. And that's where the journey really started, as being a wine professional.
So maybe it's the third guy, Andy.
Yeah, Andy was
big
Andy
influence
introduced
in forward
the
direction.
single most important influence as far as getting me into the wine industry.
So what do you wind up doing at City Zen?
So we had a really tight knit community. So I ended up being a captain and sort of worked like his assistant sommelier. So I'd come in early.
So you had a desire to work with wine while you were casting and all that.
Yeah, and then I ended up opening a restaurant for City Zen for Eric as wine director and GM. But it was all I did. I worked and I studied. And we had a community. We would do blind tastings 3 or 4 times a week. And again, I was really young. I was 23 when I started taking exams. And I passed 3 of the 4 exams by the time I was 24. So in 18 months, I passed the introductory, certified, and advanced exam.
This is for the court?
Yeah. It was like my life. It's all I did, and I loved it.
Isn't it crazy that it almost takes your life to learn all that and to pass it? And not an easy thing, right?
No, it does. It consumes your entire life. If you think you got to just be passing it, you'll never pass it.
Right.
I mean, you may get to the first, maybe the second level, but after that, you're dead in the water.
So you leave City Zen?
Yeah, so
Why?
leave City Zen because I had an opportunity to move to Aspen to work at Little Nell, and Little Nell is...
So you got to just set that up for me.
Yeah, so...
How does that...
So I met Sabato Sagaria, who you probably know. He
was he at Union Square Hospitality?
This is prior to that. He was at the Little Nell. So he was the director of food and beverage at the Little Nell. And he was studying to be a master sommelier as well. So he's originally from Ohio.
Okay. So he made his way out there.
Yeah, so
part of this bald-headed mafia.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's what a prerequisite. So we met at one of these sort of like wine fair things and really hit it off. I met Dustin Wilson as well. We all hung out, and then I got a call from him and Dustin saying, "Hey, look, Dustin's leaving. He's going to work at RN74 in San Francisco because Raj was like a great
Raj Parr.
Yeah, he was going to work for Raj. And RN74 was the wine restaurant in San Francisco.
No,
yes,
it wasn't. Yeah.
At the time, so he went to go work for him, and they needed a replacement. And I went to Andy because I had so much respect for him. I said, "Hey, I want to entertain this opportunity." 100% supportive. He said, "Do it." And so I flew out to Aspen. Incredible guy. He only wanted the best for me. And I went out to Aspen, spent a couple days interviewing. I came back. They offered me the job, and I moved to Aspen.
It's so funny because we talked about, how isolated you were. And,
yeah.
Just Aspen it's so singular in what it is,
Yeah. And
ski, upscale.
I was very much out of my league. I mean, I was a city kid. I only lived in DC and New York City at the time. And it was just this whole new world that I'd never seen a pair of skis in my life. And
makes sense.
And I ended up being in Aspen.
Did you have to start buying suits along the way for all this stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the moment, when you're a captain, you're always in a uniform. But the moment I became a sommelier, now I'm out. Yeah, you got to wear suits. That's the name of the game.
So you may have said this or not. How did Sabato hear about you?
We met at like a wine fair in Denver. I got invited. There was this wine fair for wines in New Zealand when they were really starting to market their wines, their high-end wines.
Right. They were in town to do.
They flew out psalms from around the country, and it was in Denver. So I met him and Dustin there, and through the court as well, because we were all going through exams together at the same time. And I took the advanced exam with Dustin, and we met through that and became friends.
I guess you hit it off. All right. So you're at the Little Nell. Are you now pretty much focused on just wine?
Exclusively.
So this is
my life. Yeah.
Is this the first pure wine job?
Yes. because I had opened a restaurant for Eric before, but I was sort of like the sommelier GM.
Right.
This is only wine.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was Sabado, like the GM or?
So he was the director of food and beverage for
He
the whole
was the
for the whole
beverage,
resort. Yeah.
All right. So you're at Little Nell.
Mhm.
Pretty impressive clientele, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
in a legacy of great sommeliers.
You meet a guy who HVAC guy and a farmer.
Yeah.
This is the romantic guy you meet.
Yeah.
That changes your life.
Yes.
Right? So you meet a guy named Galen Lawrence Jr.,
Mm-hmm.
whose family is a very successful Middle Western business thing. I guess, and take it from here. I'm talking to him. He's a wine guy. That's why
he's a wine collector, loves wine.
Right.
Yep.
So
and
he's
actually
one of your customers.
Yeah, he was in Aspen when we initially went for his wife's birthday. And they'd never been to Aspen. They said, let's go to Aspen and check it out. And they came out with some friends. And I had developed a special room in our wine cellar. The Nell has a massive wine cellar. And it became called the Red Light Lounge. It had red lights. It was cool. We had cool music. It was a great place to go.
Tables and chairs.
And there was this big article that was done about it. His friend read about the article. Was like, "Oh, you're going to Aspen? You should check this out." So they ended up coming down, and what was a quick bottle of wine turned into, 6 hours later, and we really hit it off. And Galen remains a great wine lover and wine collector, and we kept in touch. I really liked him. We got along very well from very different parts of the world.
So at that point, because you'll tie everything together, he had nothing to do with Heights.
He wasn't in the wine industry at all.
Right. So you get a phone call.
He called me and he said, "Hey, look, because his daughter lived in St. Helena, she went to the CIA in Napa, and she was
had
there."
an eye towards what was going on.
Well,
up
he
there.
was looking for. He's very close to his kids, and he was looking for something to invest in Napa that would bring him closer to his daughter, and he could spend more time with her. And when he would go out and visit her, he would go out and look at vineyards and things like that. And as he says, he's like, "I don't even know what I was looking at, but I was just looking at opportunities." And somehow Heights popped up, and
again,
it was
timing thing, right?
And it was brought to him, and he called me and asked what I thought, and I said, Galen Heights is, I think in the very top echelon of most important historical estates in Napa, and I said,
Heights?
I go, just if you have the opportunity, you should, jump at this. And so I flew down to Arkansas and spent a couple of days with him, really mapping out what I think needed to happen at Heights for it to sort of, get back to its early glory. And so he was very grateful for that, and he closed the deal. He called me and said, "Hey, we closed this deal. I want to thank you. You were really helpful in guiding me along the way and what we should be doing. And so I want you to come out to Napa and we'll just celebrate and have a great dinner." So I came out.
Was there designs there? Was it a celebration, or that was the beginning of him trying to coax you?
Both. I was only aware of one of those strategies at the time, and we had some great dinners, and I was always very honest with Galen. I think our relationship is very much built on trust, and I'm always very brutally honest with him. So we were out there, and then he brought up the idea of me coming there. I said, "Well," that's very flattering, Galen, but I've never run a winery in my life. I'm a wine director for a pretty large company, and I said, I listed out all the things that I didn't know how to do, which is,
right up front.
Yeah, I was not going to lie to him. He's a friend. And I listed those things, and he was very grateful for that because he knew he could trust me. He says, "Nobody else."
Right.
Just,
everyone's going to BS their way through.
Yeah, and he went through and he says, "Carlton, you're a highly intelligent person. You're a quick learner. I have no doubt in my mind that you'll learn these things very quickly. I'd love to have you do it." And it was difficult for me because I had a great life in Aspen. I had what I would say is probably the greatest sommelier job in America. I only worked 10 months out of the year.
So you weren't at the point. See, my career was the opposite. It was
Yeah.
aspiration, and you were at the point. It would almost sound like this is fun and comfortable. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Versus, wait a second.
I had the itch because I was young.
There's a lot of risk. Could fall on my ass and lose what I have, but
I've always been that way.
But ultimately, you made that decision.
My whole life up to that point is taking risk of just saying, this is a new opportunity. It's a new life experience. Why not do it? I always trusted myself. I'll always be okay, right? I'm a survivor. I'm a hustler. I'll figure it out. And
Not scared. Not
um,
scared to fail.
no,
Not scared that I'm BSing this guy. Because you were transparent. Here's what I don't know.
extremely. And I took the job. I moved out. And,
What year was it?
I took the job officially in 2018 in December, and I was commuting between Aspen and Napa for 4 months every week. So I'd work 3 or 4 days in Aspen, 3 or 4 days in Napa.
That can't be a direct flight.
There actually is a direct from. That's the only reason to work from SFO to
Oh,
Aspen.
really? Oh, okay.
And I would go out every single week, and that was a really difficult time because I took 0 days off for 4 months, and I was just working, trying to keep everything going at the Nell because I was really committed to making sure
they
that
knew everything going
yes.
on? You were,
And what I told them was,
Wh-
I'm not going to leave until I know that things are stable here.
so you made it clear you were going to leave, but
Yeah.
at the appropriate time, which could be 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months.
It was
Whatever.
4 months,
Right.
but I never slacked at the Nell. I was fully committed, and we promoted one of my sommeliers, but I stayed on until he felt comfortable. And 4 months later, in April, I officially moved full time to Napa.
And you take on what title at Heights?
I was the CEO.
You were the CEO, and that was Galen's first foray in
Yeah.
owning a winery.
Yeah.
And ironically, it was maybe to find something to get him close to his daughter.
Yeah.
He was an established wine lover.
Yes.
So he stumbles on you. Not stumbles, he meets you at the restaurant. All right, so we're going to talk about Heights and what you did at Heights and, your guys' vision, you and Galen, and, what came. I just wanted to get your take on this, and I don't think you disagree with me. I've always viewed the wine world, and it became more apparent to me when people were talking about it as a bit elitist, pretty darn white,
Sure.
male,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I know that's been changing.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, we're talking about Sabato. He took a role as the quartermaster sommeliers.
Yeah.
They had, their problems. The New York Times did these multiple stories about sexual harassment,
Mm-hmm.
with women in the business. And, you and I can attest that there's been not a rise, but the creation of these diversity organizations, which we can talk about. Looking through your lens, this is who you are. Have you seen satisfactory progress? Was it ever an issue with you? Obviously you started Roots Fund, so you felt something. Have things changed? Did COVID kind of put a roadblock and nothing ever? What's your view on
look,
that?
So to again, my perspective on things goes back to, how my grandmother raised me, which was to never be anybody's victim. We live in America, and as flawed as it is, it's still a place of great opportunity, and don't let that slow you down. She would talk about when she was a kid. She's like, that was hard. She's like, look, America's a different place now. It gets better all the time, and you have no excuses, right? Are there going to be people who are racist and bigots? Yeah, and they'll be in the world forever. It has always been a case, always will be a case, just a different target.
But it seems
depending
like
on
it
where you
was
are.
more built-in wine, just the culture.
Well, yeah, because you have to understand, it's just the culture of the beverage was very much a European beverage.
Right.
And
That's the
it was,
gatekeeping part.
yeah, and it's not price point. People always talk about the expensive, but it's very inexpensive wine. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that's factual. It was just culturally a beverage that was produced and consumed by Europeans for thousands of years, right? And I think now that we look at America as the greatest wine market in the world. We're a very diverse country. It was just bound to happen. But the issue was that the wine industry had not taken a deep look at how wine was marketed, and sort of and that's where I think the beer and spirit industry really looks, that they have an advantage because they just wanted whoever would buy their product to buy it. They couldn't care less. Right?
Good point.
Yeah, the wine industry had always presented themselves as sort of this luxury European-facing product, not recognizing that there's a massive population in the U.S. of people who can absolutely afford the product at different levels, but weren't engaging because they were able to market it. And I think that during like 2020, it was a big wake up call for the industry. And I think things are changing, but we're only talking 4 years. The whole industry is not going to swing in 4 years, but have you seen change? Absolutely. Will there be more? Sure, if only for the financial gain for the industry. But whatever the motivation is, there's change that's already happening, and it's
But
a
there
big.
was sort of this cultural drive during the pandemic. I don't
Sure, I think
that as much now.
Well, no,
Does
anywhere.
that mean
Yeah.
it's sort of slowed down, or
Yeah.
it's not as hot?
Well, look, America has cause amnesia.
Yeah.
We get really passionate about a cause until the next news bill comes in.
That's it.
That's but I think a lot of the sort of foundation of the work really stuck. I think during 2020 we all had a lot of time to sit and think about things, and obviously there was a lot of protest and uprising about the racial issues in America, which is obviously we know not a new situation, but it sort of comes in waves, right?
Right.
You get the 60s and the 70s, 80s, and it's sort of every decade there's a reminder that, have things progress a little bit, sure, but they're still not where they need to be. And that I think made everyone sort of look at themselves, look at the world, and ask the question like what you can do to create greater equality. And I think that while it has, the movement is sort of toned down a little bit as far as people's vigor, companies' vigor, and things like that. There's still a foundation that was built, and there's progress that was made and will remain.
Right.
I don't think that people talk about now that a lot of these big companies are removing their DEI. I actually don't think that's where the change happens, because they just flow with the wind. Anyway, it's really on the grassroots. It's people every day. Right? It's like how you interact with people every day. And I think that is permanent now.
That's the mentality.
I think it's permanent now.
Yeah. You're the perfect person to ask this. Beyond the education part, which is probably the biggest part to some people, do we need a quartermaster sommeliers? I mean, for everything they do other than the education,
we do.
Which they did a crappy job.
Yeah, we do. And I'll tell you why. I got a lot of slack for supporting the idea of the quartermaster sommeliers when they were going through, all of the controversy. And
so when people were dropping their pins, you were hanging in.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why is I look at the world pre-quartermaster sommeliers, and there was no legitimacy in the craft of sommelier in the U.S. during that time, with the exception of a very few small group. And the quartermaster sommelier is single-handedly responsible for developing the title of sommelier in America. That is non-negotiable. Because if you look at the timeline, and you look at the 70s, did you have sommeliers in New York? Absolutely. It's a very small group, right?
Right.
80s, a little bit more. 90s, there's a boom. There's sommeliers everywhere. It used to be, most restaurants, it was the GM or the bartender, and they would come and open your wine, and by the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, you get sommeliers everywhere now.
Right.
And they're all training through the quartermaster sommeliers. It's a very structured curriculum that you really cover all the wines of the world, and you create a community. But by developing the role of the sommelier, it actually built the wine industry in America. Because you look at wine consumption in America, and you put it at the same timeline as the quartermaster sommeliers, wine consumption in the mid-90s boomed, and it continues to boom. So that's not by happenstance. Is the organization flawed in its previous state? Absolutely. Anyone who's going to argue that is foolish. I never defended the behavior. And what I said was that the quartermaster sommeliers with better structure, better leadership, better values will be even more impactful, right?
Because it has the bones to do
it has
the right
the bones,
stuff.
right? And so I actually wrote a letter to who's now the president, and said, look, one, I'm building a wine enterprise. I don't have time to be involved. But I'll tell you, these are the things that need to happen. This is the way my mind works, action. I said, immediately, the quartermaster sommelier needs a CEO that has nothing to do with the wine industry, that can focus on how to develop, maintain, and grow an educational institution. Your board, 50% of the board needs to be outside of the wine industry. unique context and oversight outside of this industry.
Thoughtful ideas.
Yeah, and I said, you need to remove the barriers to these things. So that was my idea, to drive remote introductory level Sommelier courses. I said, we live in a world, we have the technology now, everyone's using it. Why does someone need to take off of work, fly somewhere, have a hotel just to get the introductory? I said, it financially makes no sense. We have Zoom. Do it over Zoom. Do the course.
Practical.
Ship them the wines. I said, now you're talking about a course that costs half the money. You don't need to take off work because you can during the day before. It's more inclusive. People are where they are. Because part of the course as well was, it was like you could thrive if you were in an environment where you had mentorship, and people around the country didn't have that because all the sommeliers were focused in very dense areas. So if you were an ambitious young wine professional in Iowa, chances are you didn't have a master sommelier close to mentor you, right? And obviously it goes without saying that there needed to be better oversight on people's behavior. And we knew that that was not a quartermaster sommelier specific issue. It was the whole restaurant industry, right? It was, we presented as this luxury, incredible industry, but in the back, we know what was happening. So it was really, I think, the court became the scapegoat for it, which rightfully so. They had those same issues, but it really, I think, changed the whole restaurant industry at that time. And it was like a look at, like, why are we sustaining this behavior when none of us actually, can we change this? And it changed the restaurant industry, I think, forever. And that's a great thing.
That is, you laid that out eloquently, because it's hard to find. It's not hard to find. You don't hear a lot of, the positives. People are just not talking about it, and for some reason they're negative.
And by the way, I'll say, the quartermaster sommelier has more people enrolled now than ever before. It's thriving, but it's a better environment.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
people aren't moving towards something.
Yes.
That sucks. Before we take a break, now's a good time to tie in the Roots Fund, what it is, what you're doing, how it came about.
Yeah.
One of the leading organizations in trying to, bring diversity to the industry.
So I obviously during 2020, I did soul searching just like everybody else did. And my perspective was one of gratitude for the opportunities that I had been given. I knew where I came from. And I knew that I never, to this day, take any credit for any of my success. Because anyone who says they're self-made, especially when you come from where I came from, you're a narcissist and you're a fool. My path was created from people opening those paths for me. I had to do the work, but the opportunity was open for me. And I said, well, I've done nothing to create paths for other people. Yes, I've mentored a few people, but it's like, I think big with everything else in my life. Why would I not think as big with this? So I called my friend Hakimi DeBose, who's now the executive director. We were both recipients of CCAP scholarships. And I said, what if we could do a CCAP for like the wine industry? That was the whole premise. And we set out to do it. I didn't know how to do it. She had a lot of experience in nonprofits. So really became, okay, great. Well, I'm going to take a step back. You're going to lead this, and I'll be on the board. So we now have a really fantastic board, and it's grown. I would say that, the Roots Fund has been anchored in creating opportunities for communities of color. But through that journey, we recognize that, while there are tremendous barriers to entry in the wine industry for communities of color, there's also a class issue with wine in the way that it is represented. So we've actually started to also work with communities that are impoverished white communities. Because I said, if the goal is to create a more exciting wine industry that allows people from various walks of life to now play a role in it, I want a bigger, more successful, vibrant wine industry. I said, are we now creating the reverse exclusive community? Right. Is that actually diversity? Right. If we're now excluding this demographic, and that was a hard thing to recognize and react. As you can see, there's a track record of me, I think, doing things that I believe in that I know is popular, and I was raised that way by my grandmother. Somebody's got to do it. That statement in our board meeting was not well received initially. Because there's obviously
but it's
some pent up tension because for so long communities of colors are just not allowed a seat at the
Let's
table.
concentrate on this.
But I think about things unemotionally, and I said, sure, I get that, but is what I'm saying correct? And it took us a while to get to what that looked like, and that's evolved the organization to really focus on serving underserved communities, which are predominantly communities of color, but not exclusively.
Right.
Yes.
You open that door.
Yeah.
If anyone listening wants to find out more, reach out to Roots Fund. What's the best way?
Yeah, rootsfund.org. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
.org.
Yeah.
All right, Carlton, we have to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to get into the wines, the company, the business philosophies, and a bunch of other stuff. So we're talking to Carlton McCoy. Carlton is the president and CEO of LWE, or CEO?
It's we have Gail and I are both it's so funny.
BS.
They don't matter.
I know.
And it's so funny because we're from such different parts of the world, and we think so much alike. And he always made fun of the titles, and he'd say, I go, Gillen, what should I be putting on my business card? Because at one point I was the CEO of Heights, but then as we expanded, it was like, what do I do? And he's like, I don't know, co-founder, proprietor, I don't know. He goes, call yourself whatever you want to call yourself, right? So it's changed.
Well, things change.
Yeah,
it's kind of
annually.
cool that you're not stuck on one thing.
No.
So, but we have to take a break. So Carlton is that many
managing partner and CEO of Lawrence Wine
Right.
Estates. Yes.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about that. You're listening to the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Carlton McCoy. Now we're going to dig into basically what you're devoting your days, weeks, months, and years to. And that is Lawrence Wine Estates. And just give me how Heights grew into Lawrence Wine
Sure.
Estates. Was it, I'm throwing you, not a softball, but I'm kind of throwing you the question. Was it like, this is fun, we're good at this, let's get and do more? I mean, how do you go to the next?
No, so maybe what I'll do is I'll do chronologically the acquisitions and the brands, and then we'll get into the philosophies behind it and what really drove us. So we started in 2018 with Heights Cellar. In 2019, we bought the last remaining parcel that was the original sort of trailside Wildwood Vineyard in Rutherford. That same year, we bought the legendary Haynes Vineyard, Coombsville. 2020, we bought both Burgess and Stony Hill. Nothing in 21. 22, we bought Chateau Lascaux in Margaux.
Okay, so Lascaux is the last thing, first
Yeah.
thing out of the country. One of the common threads that I find with these wineries is some kind of deep tradition.
Yes.
Of either history,
Mhm.
the property,
Yes.
has a notoriety, the people,
Yes.
that's the winery with that guy,
Yes.
type thing. Or how long these wineries have been around.
Yeah, a long time.
25-year-old
Yeah.
restaurant's an accomplishment. An old winery in Napa is kind
Yeah.
of a big deal. Tell me about that. That obviously played into
Yeah.
what interested you.
So what brought us to Napa was Heights. It was because Gil and I both adored the classical style of Napa Valley wines. And
which is the pre-Parker.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. It's the Napa before the '94 vintage sort of thing, or '97 vintage, depending on who you talk to, which was made in a dramatically different style. Very balanced wines, wines of great longevity, great acid and structure, but elegance and nuance, and that's what we loved. And that was the only thing we loved. Nothing against the modern style. I think that I'm a big believer that people should make the type of wine that excites them and that they're excited to make. But that's not what excited us. And so we really went on this venture of first focusing on Heights. When we were hyper-focused on Heights, the acquisition of the Wildwood Ranch in Rutherford next to Trailside and Haynes initially were just vineyard purchases, and they were great vineyards that we were really excited to own, old historical vineyards. I'm a history buff. I love history, but we recognized was that we were not the only ones who loved this style. That I knew that sommeliers adored the style, but we started to see this shift in. I don't like the word consumer, so I never use it. I'd say wine collectors focus away from the big, massive style of Napa, which I think in some way will always exist, as it should. I think diversity of style in a region.
They a market that likes it.
Well, and also it's but diversity of style is important.
You kind of noted '94 as the time. When after that are we talking about right now? When was there this I think recognition or weariness or moving on from that?
Mid '90s, you started to see the hyper modernization of the styles of Napa Valley wine, and that was exclusively due to Parker's recognition of those wines.
But when did people kind of realize?
Oh no, that's happening now.
Still,
I mean, we got into Napa in really 2018-19, and I started hearing these grumblings of some of the big wines in Napa were for the first time struggling to sell their wines. Clearly, sommeliers weren't excited to buy them, and that was going on. And so I said, I think we may have hit the timing perfectly, and so that just really motivated us even more of well, let's not be in the back of this, be in the front of the movement. And I'm a very driven person with a lot of energy, so the first actual, I would say, brand after Heights was Haynes, because I knew this vineyard was great. I actually had lunch with Warren Warnowski, who became a great mentor before he passed away, great man. And he was the sole purchaser of fruit from Haynes.
So Haynes didn't make wine.
Never. They never had a brand.
Warnowski was their single client.
From the 70s all the way through the 90s.
Was the Stag's Leap bottle, Stag's Leap Chardonnay Haynes?
It never said Haynes. It just said Stag's Leap Chardonnay.
Right, so I mentioned this. This is a good time. Yeah. We're talking about the vineyard. You brought two wines. Yeah. One of them is the Haynes Chardonnay. Let's just do a little taste and evaluation as we continue the story. Yeah. So in front of us is a 2021 Haynes Forgeron.
Yeah. So
what does Forgeron
So we made two Chardonnays from Haynes, and I'll tell you why. Forgeron is it's actually a blacksmith, because the property. Yes, the property has a very old history. And prior to the Haynes family buying the property in the 1860s, there was a blacksmith who worked there, and so we sort of honor that history going back to the early 1800s. So the Haynes Vineyard, again, Warren Warnowski was the sole buyer of the fruit. 70s, 80s, 90s. It's 27 planted acres.
Okay.
And
nice
yeah, and he taught me a lot about this ranch, and he said, he goes, I left Haynes and bought my own vineyard because Patricia Haynes wouldn't sell it to me. And I wanted to own and farm the vineyard that I was sourcing from. But he was really clear that Haynes was the greatest vineyard in Coombsville.
Could he emulate things other than the exact site?
No.
Like the soils there and the exposure?
He bought the Arcadia vineyard, which is in a different part of Coombsville. Still, Coombsville is the coldest subregion of Napa, much cooler than the Northern Valley, but not Haynes. And he was pretty open about that. Haynes is of Coombsville the coldest site within Coombsville. The soils are volcanic and diatomaceous, because you have to remember Coombsville it's a collapsed volcano that became an ancient lake, dried up, fossilized sea creatures, very similar to limestone in its structure, which is the only place in Napa that has that soil. So we've got original Windy clone Chardonnay planted in 1967, and Martini clone Pinot planted in 1967. So that's what is in the bottle here. That's one of the reasons why we bought it. The soils are great, but the vine material, to have old vines like that were very healthy. So we bought it, and the first year we were still selling fruit, and I tasted the wines that were made there, and you could see the potential, but I felt that no one had, like, I think really pushed it to like its full potential. So we made a big decision in 20 to no longer sell fruit and to develop this brand, which is, developing new brands is very
Where
difficult.
do you make the wine?
At Haynes, at a small winery.
Was it there? Or
Yeah, it was there.
It was.
So the vineyard was developed by Andre Telechev and Louis Martini. They were a team. So Louis Martini oversaw viticulture, and Andre Telechev really directed what was planted in the winemaking a lot of times. And they were instrumental in the push south to colder parts of Napa, where you could really thrive with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's a better climate.
What does cool climate do to a Chardonnay?
What it does is, one, you slow down the growing season so you can get better phenolic maturity, but it preserves the acidity in the wine, which is critical for the style of Chardonnays that we like to make.
Is it less, I see it, is it less big than what people
Oh,
know?
yeah, it's the antithesis.
That's the interest.
You have to remember,
you don't get that buttery,
Yeah,
popcorny.
you have to remember, it's like, I came from the Lubinal, which 80% of the collection is Burgundy. I used to go to Burgundy 3 or 4 times a year. That's my expectation when I'm tasting Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So we make these wines through that lens. But I really like the old school white Burgundies from the 80s and in 70s, which were more textural and sacrificed that sort of racy structure for texture and longevity. And that was our focus here of thinking of these wines through the lens of the great Ramonays of the 80s, which are my favorite white Burgundies of all times. So the vineyard itself has one little hillside, and it's sort of about 15% of the vineyard crops over and is south facing. So we have 2 very distinct exposures, so we vinify them separately. And we didn't really know what we had. We just said, look, there's 2 exposures, they're going to be different. So we vinify them separately. And we recognized was that the north facing and the south facing were dramatically different wines. And we realized it wasn't actually about sun, it was about wind. So where Haynes sit, it has a direct line, you can see the San Pablo Bay. There's nothing that is a wind block. So the south facing is getting crushed by wind every day. It's cold and windy. And what you find is that viticulture is windy vineyards produce grapes with thicker skins as a defense mechanism. The north side was protected by the hillside from the wind. So the skins and the phenolics on the south facing side were dramatically different. They made 2 very different wines, so we made the decision to bottle them separately. So Corazon is the south-facing, windy side. Forgeron is the north-facing, more protected side.
So let's talk about the Forgeron. This is a 2021. Let's do a quick evaluation. It's got a nice kind of yellowish hue, right? Talk to me about the nose. What do you get on the nose?
To me, I think we're really talking about place and also vine age. Where you notice that there's a great intensity of aromatic. So this is old vine, so it's very low yielding,
intense.
And it's very, very dense, right?
Am I Burgundian? Very Burgundian.
But what you're looking at is the intensity and the power of Grand Cru White Burgundy, which people don't recognize is the richest wines in all of Burgundy are Grand Cru White Burgundies.
Right.
There's a reason why if you study the laws of Burgundy, Chardonnay, especially in Grand Cru vineyards, has a higher legal alcohol limit than Pinot Noir of any other vineyard because it has potential for more power. So here we're looking at more of the sort of like Chassagne side of things, which there's more opulence, but there's that chiseled minerality that comes from the diatomaceous soils. I don't want to make fresh, prickly, reductive Chardonnay. There's enough of that being engineered all over California. We don't pick these early. I don't believe it. People say it's early. It's not. We have a long growing season. We just are able to pick it at lower bricks because it's a very cold site. So you're getting a lot of intensity, and a lot of that has to do with the way we make the wines as well. We're not delicate with this. We bring the fruit in, whole cluster press. We press it very hard. We want all of the solids. We want it what they call press it till it's dirty. is what we
I was
say.
gonna say, it sounds
Yes,
dirty.
yes. We brown the juice. We leave all the gross leaves on. We barrel ferment. We use very particular cooperage, and we ferment it very hot because we want to blow off all the fruity esters. I want no fruit in this wine. The wines are brought in every night into a cold cellar to cool them down, and they're brought back out until they're dry. The wines are never moved. The vessel that they're fermented in, they live their entire life in because we never rack the wines, and we do zero batonnage. We keep them topped up, and we don't add sulfur till about a year in because the pH of the wine is so low that they're completely stable. And we don't add it systemically. So it's barrel by barrel when it's needed, right? The wines also see a very long élevage. Because we're not adding a lot of oxygen through batonnage and racking, we age the wines for 2 years without moving them. So it's a very, very slow, gradual oxidation. And they're not fined or filtered and bottled with very minimal sulfur. Just the middle that you need. It changes every year.
So the mouthfeel, sort of medium. It's not a thin wine, and it's not this overly. I mean, it's really in the spot.
One thing I'll say is, when I look at classical wines, they're like most of life. The answer's in the middle. I do not like big hedonistic wines. I equally detest anemic wines, and I think that often, as a counter to the Parker days, so many people have gone through the exact opposite of making these really thin anemic wines. They're a great quaff. They're not great wines. They won't age. They don't go well with food. The answer is in the middle. You know, but I want texture. To me, great white wines are about texture. So for us, you notice you get tannin on this wine because we press it very hard. We want tannin in the white wine. It also helps the wines age.
What does the palate replicate anything on the nose? What do you get on the palate here?
For me, I think, and I'll compare this to Great White Burgundy. It's palate for me is more about structure because anything you sort of taste in the palate is actually retronasal, so you're smelling it anyway. To me, aromatically, you're getting this sort of flinty minerality that's an expression of those diatomaceous soils, purely. A lot of concentrated aromas because of the vine age in very low yields, but also because we're keeping it on those full leaves for a full 2 years.
Wow.
Texture. It's a texture bomb.
It's all
right?
there.
And it's a white wine that you just can't.
Is this something you kind of relish alone, or is this a good food wine?
Oh, it's a great food wine.
What
I think of
classic
I'm a classically trained old school French chef.
Right.
The Great White Burgundies were always served with lighter white meats. I think veal with a morel sauce. I think roast chicken, richer fish dishes that have sort of one of those, old school cream sauces that I really, really love.
About the sauce, not the
yes,
fish.
always,
So
right? French food is about the sauce.
Yeah.
So you're thinking of richer white fish, but also lighter white meats.
Yeah.
And these wines will age, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
they
can
will
see.
age incredibly well.
I could see. So that's the Haynes Vineyard. I'm sure a lot of you, never heard of it, but obviously it's been around. I mean,
Yeah, we do really well in
knew what
restaurant.
he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always hate to talk about this, but it's not a cheap wine, so we're just shooting that up to people.
Well, we look at it is there's a couple things that go into that. One is incredibly low yields, right? And the time and energy that goes into making these wines. We also have to recognize that all the wines in our entire enterprise are from biodynamically farmed vineyards. All the wines are naturally fermented.
The Haynes?
All the wines in our group.
All right,
So
I wanted to talk to you about that a little
I converted
later.
all of our vineyards to biodynamic farming in 2019.
So, what is that your upbringing when you realized, all the way up to Romani Conti and all these other ways, that's the only way to farm?
Yeah, I mean,
As far as health of the community and of the grapes?
and you say that both matter, right? We always talk about the impact of natural farming on the vine, but think about farmers. Think about the community, right? I think it's one of the biggest shames and
But
crimes
that
against
went
our
in your
industry.
thought process.
Because, and I'll tell you when I first moved to Napa, I lived in a small ranch house in the middle of the trailside vineyard, and we were
Well,
really
shit's out
fortunate. Yeah, we were really fortunate that Heights was actually the leader in organic farming in Napa Valley. They were certified organic in 1984 when I was born. They never talked about it because at the time that was looked at as like weird hippie farming. no one would talk about it. So Heights never discussed organic
They were
farming.
kind of hippies, though, weren't they?
Well, most people in that era were.
Yeah,
But you didn't talk about organics because also in the wine shops, it was like this little organic section, and they were often not very good wines, especially in the U.S.
Right.
So they didn't talk about it. But I thought about it all the time. I'm waking up in the morning, I'm running the vineyard. I don't want to run through a vineyard that's got
Wait, you have kids?
all these chemicals and artificial like fertilizers and things like this. So that really inspired me to go full bore, saying, look, if we're going to be leaders here, we have to practice what we preach. And we started converting everything immediately.
So I guess we'll wait till we get to each winery,
Sure.
when they did it and how. So that's the Haynes. I want to talk to you about two storied wineries because of history, property, and I'm a big fan of the people. When you talk
Right.
about Stony Hill,
Yeah.
is Jamie still there?
Jamie's not. We actually, so they grown their family, so they had to have a second kid. So
Who'd you bring in?
Reed Griggs, he is.
I know Reed.
He's an absolutely brilliant young
Was Reed a
talent.
New Yorker? No.
No, Reed got his chops working at Gonon in Saint Joseph.
My maybe top of my
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, and
I did
He
an
came
interview
back.
with him. Love the guy.
brilliant people, brilliant wines. It's great when the people are as great as the wines. It's not always the case, unfortunately. He came back to the U.S., worked at Ridge.
Good hybrid.
Yeah.
Good background.
Yeah, and then he came up. He did a stint at Harlan, and then actually worked for my wife at Della Valle. That's where I met him. And I just, you sit and you have dinner with someone, and he became a friend, him and his wife. And I listened to what he talked about wine. He is technically a brilliant winemaker, but listening to his philosophy around
He's
things,
soulful.
extremely. And
Right.
and we really connected over that. So when
How long has he been doing it?
his whole adult life, he went
No, how long has he been at Stony?
so his first vintage was 23.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's
so Jamie
all-
made
And you feel good
21,
about
22.
that.
Overjoyed. I mean, I've been, with what we have built, it's only possible with curating great talent that is capable of making the wines that we're excited to make. They have that technical know-how and the philosophical understanding of why. Because I can't be there every day for every decision, so I have to trust that the person there knows what the vision is.
So
Right?
let's take that as a segue to business philosophy.
Mhm.
You have individual silos.
Yeah.
Right? And you could be this heavy-handed, get in a pickup truck and just hammer everybody every, half hour.
Yeah.
How do you, what's the business environment you've created? What's the philosophy?
Well, what we want is one. It was really critical for me. It was the first thing I said to Galen as we started expanding. Was I said, Galen, I don't want to be one of these wine companies where all the wines taste the same. I don't want a house style. I said that to me is the opposite of what I'm interested in. I said, you're just another big company. I said, we need these wineries to, in a way, be connected with some core philosophies, but live in their own bubble. So we have different teams for each estate. I work with each team individually, working through the ethos and the style of what we're doing, the philosophies, and they're very separate. There are a few things that connect them all, but they're all very individual. We
So decentralized,
extremely
but
decentralized.
the connection is where you can offer them value, assets, help, whatever.
I work very closely with them every day. So everything from farming to winemaking to sales and marketing. I'm a very, very, very hands-on person. But hands-on does not mean you're a dictator or I'm a big believer in, we talk about what the goals are, what we're trying to do. You tell me the answer, and then we'll discuss that to make sure it makes sense. Because I like to work with thinking people.
You're a good listener.
Well, it has to be, because if
Well,
they
not so easy.
if they don't understand it, then they can't execute it every day. And more importantly, they can't wiggle when things don't go right because they don't understand what the North Star is, right? If you also notice is almost all of our estates are single vineyard estates, right? We don't have a single brand where it's General Napa Valley. We don't. Haynes comes exclusively from the Haynes Vineyard. There'll never be a grape brought in from it. Trailside comes exclusively from the Trailside Vineyard, right? Stony
Burgess will
Hills
do
comes from-
Sorensen, or
They have Sorensen and Quartz Creek. Those are the two
Right.
things they work with. So these are wines that have a deep connection with a piece of land, not just General Napa.
right. That's also one of the descriptions of what and how you do.
Yeah.
And is Megan still at
Yeah, she's at Burgess. Yeah,
Burgess?
making brilliant wine. I absolutely
So
adore working with
are
her.
there older vines there? There's
Yeah,
the
so-
replanting. There's a mixture of
so
everything. The
really-
Sorensen thing's
Yeah,
famous.
so it's an interesting story. So when we bought Burgess, I pushed Galen to buy Burgess because I had always loved the older wines, 70s, 80s, even through the 90s and early 2000s. And I always respected and honored, as I did at Heights and Stony Hill, they never changed the style. And I found out why. It was because Bill Sorensen was the winemaker from 1972 through 2013. One single
That's what
person,
you
one
need.
single vision. But we never knew who Bill was. They didn't talk about him. So we found out when we did a historical analysis of that vineyard, one, that it was planted in the 1870s, and that it became what was known as Souverain in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
I remember Souverain.
From Lee Stewart. That was that vineyard. And then it became Burgess once they bought it and they rebranded it with their name. But the vineyard had incredible pedigree. But we also found that Bill Sorensen was still alive. So we got to connect with him and his family. And I made a decision that was, I think, it really brings home how we think about what a winery is. I'm a restaurant guy. To me, the chef is the soul of the house. For me, our winemaking team is the soul of what we do. So we made the decision to name that vineyard after Bill. And
It's a nice tribute.
yeah, because so many of these people, Mike Collini at Stony Hill, Bill Sorensen at Burgess, because their name's not on the title, the ownership, people forget about them. But they are the actual people doing this. So we honored him, and now the top wine at Burgess is the Sorensen vineyard. And at that vineyard, we have vines going back to the mid 80s on that hillside.
Wow. You have a project called Brendel.
Yeah.
It seems like, I could be wrong here, but, here's our chance to be a little hipster, play around
Sure.
with the labels,
Yeah.
experiment a little.
Yeah.
It looks like a fun brand, and I
It is, and
assume
it's-
under the umbrella
Yeah.
it's all quality. But
Well, it's all our food, but it is fun, and I think that's a great way to put it, because we set out a mission to prove that you could make very high pedigree, age-worthy, classical wines and be successful. But all my winemakers are very young, and we needed a place for them to sort of play once in a while. Brendel everyone thought we were trying to make this brand to like
did
scale
it
a
exist,
brand.
or you
No, we made
created it?
But it's named after Leon Brendel, who was the gentleman who sold Joe Heights' first vineyard. And it was the guy who
Everything
actually...
ties to something.
Yes, and his family still lives in the Bay Area, and he was the first sort of inspiration for Joe Heights back in the
And
60s.
the grapes you said is there a Brendel vineyard?
No, they come from all of our sites. Usually it's like when we do a
Do you
replant,
do anything outside of your sites for this one?
we do buy a little bit of
You
fruit
do?
from sites that we like for instance,
Who's making the wine?
different winemakers, but Brittany makes a lot of them at Heights. But we have, if this winemaker is interested in making this, we'll let them make this. It's like, everyone thought we were trying to build this like less expensive brand to scale it. We don't know how to scale things. I'm going to be very clear about that. We're not good at making a lot of wine. We're good at a lot of things. We're not good at doing that. So obviously financially, it's a really poor financial structure, but it's really fun for us. We got to do we bought some fruit from like the Monte Rosso vineyard on Moon Mountain and played with that. Like we sort of play with it. There is no expectation for volumes. It's just what we're interested in doing. And also when we replant a vineyard, first crop we don't make wine from, so that'll go into Brendel. They tend to produce less sort of structured, more easy drinking wines. They see less new oak, less élevage, and it's been a really fun wine for us to play with and experiment with some things.
How long have you been making it?
First vintage was 2019.
Okay, so it's been around a few years.
Yeah, and
Where is the opportunity in retail? Pushing it in restaurants, mailing lists?
we don't really sell it direct. It's mainly for wholesale. It's done really well in retail and restaurants for by the glass and things like that.
Right, it's a cool by the glass house.
Yeah, and it's not something that's like we have no interest in growing it. We don't have the facilities for that. Our winemakers don't know how to do that. So it's always like a small thing, and it's that's why you don't see it everywhere. We don't make a lot of it.
Right.
But it's
I never heard of
it's
it
really
until
fun.
I dove into this interview with you.
And it's been really fun. Very different.
Brendel, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Another property you have is Ink Grade.
Yeah.
I've been a wine collector for a long time. Cut my teeth in Napa. Kind of moved away. I had more beer going on stuff.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I knew,
yeah.
kind of grew up. But I remember Behrens and Hitchcock made an
They did,
Ingrade.
yes.
Is that Ingrade? This
Yeah,
Ingrade?
so very few people knew about the site, and I'll tell you why is, so Ingrade was a vineyard that was planted in the 1870s initially. Prohibition, like a lot of the vineyards, especially in those mountain sites, got sort of abandoned. Joe Heights bought it in 1988. It was so overrun, nature had retaken it, and so he re-cleared the land and redeveloped the vineyard. But if you know Heights, Heights is not an estate that's ever been focused on mountain vineyards.
No.
It's all benchland and valley floor.
Eucalyptus
Softer
trees.
tannins, yeah, softer tannins, more aromatic wines, and so they bought it as an investment, and they always farmed it for other people and sold fruit, never made wine from it. So you will find like Heights, like Ingrade, Zinfandel, and things. The fruit didn't come from Ingrade. They needed to use it to keep the trademark for Ingrade. That's the law. So the Zinfandel was coming from St. Helena, but they just put Ingrade. So when we found it, we realized that Joe was right. It had nothing to do with Heights, but we were selling fruit to Dunn for years, because Dunn, until recently, owned very little vineyard. People don't know that. He was buying fruit forever. So we would sell fruit to Dunn. We would sell fruit to Cade. We would sell fruit to Moons. I mean, Odette, tons of wineries were buying fruit from Ingrade, but the Heights family really didn't allow for people to use the name. They liked the people at Baron and Hitchcock, so they would let them use it. So what we did was we still sell quite a bit of fruit from the vineyard, because it's a
But you do bottle it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of bottles.
But we hired Matt Taylor, who's a brilliant winemaker. I met him actually through his Pinot Noirs from the Sonoma Coast, and I loved his wines. But I didn't know he was actually the winemaker at Arajo Islay for 7 years, and had a lot of experience with Cabernet. So I brought him over, and I said, "Look, I have this vision of making a classical mountain wine, which I love." And I named names like Dunn, Philip Tony, Maya Commons. I said, if you're not interested in doing that, then we don't want to do it. That's what I want to do. And he goes, "I'm in." Matt camped out in the vineyard for 3 nights in a tent, because he really wanted to connect with the place, and he went around in an ATV and fell in love with it. So you have to understand, this Ingrade is part of a massive forested estate. It's 800 acres of forest, but only 80 acres planted on 800 acres. So it's like a little clo, up in the mountains. It goes up from 2,400 feet elevation is the top block, and goes down from there. And we've just been on this journey of trying to really discover this really wild and remote place.
It's kind of, the name's been around forever, but the project is really in its infancy.
Yeah,
as far as what you can do
we're
with
only
it.
a few vintages in, and what we've discovered is it's a really wild site. So it's east facing, unlike most of High Mountain, so we don't get the evening sun, and it's probably the lowest pH of any Cabernet site that we have.
Really?
So you get like great mountain structure, but with great acidity. And I've been really thrilled with the wines that the team has made. They're in that vein of classical mountain wines, and we've been, I think, blessed with the entire enterprise and the way people have received it, but especially that winery.
So, shameless plug, Matt's going to be on the podcast end of the month.
He's awesome. He's
and the reason is as I do podcasts, and this was unsolicited, I knew Domain maybe distributes Matt's wine, but I didn't know Matt was involved.
Yeah.
So by doing this podcast, Matt's name had come up unsolicited. I'm like, well, who's Matt?
Yeah.
Those are the type of guys that I like, to have on the show.
He's a great talent and equally fantastic human being.
All right, so we're going to talk about Trailside when we do the tasting. Couple other things. Domain, I guess you guys had the foresight to say, listen, let's create our own vertical marketing, sales. Mm-hmm. So you started Domain Estates to work with your wines, and it looks like others.
Yes, so the original ethos behind Domain was, we're never going to have really big estates. We just won't. It's not what we do. And for any of these estates to have a fighting chance in the wholesale market, we needed a consolidated sales team that would represent them all, because it's a wild world, and it's a completely different industry and a different skill set that, frankly, most people who run wineries in the operations side are not very good at, because you have to understand that world. Yeah. It's very, very difficult. So we built a company that would represent all of our wineries, consolidated as one vision in the wholesale market, and hired a really fantastic team. But then I started to talk with the investing family. I said, look, we've now built this sales team. We have 16 people out in the market. And I said, why wouldn't we import wines and sell through that as well? So we started building
the infrastructure.
Yeah, we had the infrastructure, and also selfishly, I had missed my connection with European wines, which had been a big part of my career. So it sort of reinvigorated that connection. And
so you bring in, I see.
Yeah.
How many wines are involved with the name right now?
I think
like
we're up
20
to
or-
between our own estate wines and imports about 20 brands,
Yeah, it looks
20
like that.
estates. Yeah.
Now, on the import European thing,
Mhm.
you guys left the country, and I don't think it's a domain import thing. You bought Chateau Lescombe, right?
We did in
What-
2022.
You and Galen in Aspen, maybe buying Heights, expanding. What gets you into Bordeaux?
Well, it was an opportunity that came to us, and just you understand, like culturally, Bordeaux, there's not a lot of opportunity for outside buyers.
Less than Burgundy?
Well, that's changing as well. I would
Yeah.
say
There's a
an enormous-
generational change.
There's a
here.
lot of American and Asian and Russian investment in Burgundy now.
Right.
But Bordeaux had, it was sort of really the pride of France, one of these great regions, and it was always focused on French buyers. There was some investment by the Chinese, but in second, third tier chateau that you never heard of, sort of thing. And
This is the second
yeah,
growth class.
and this is second growth in Margaux and the largest landholder in all
So-
of Margaux.
Are you looking for this? Are
No,
you
no, no,
talking
no,
to
no,
people?
no.
Somebody said,
No, it came to us and they said, there's an opportunity. We can't even actually guarantee that you're going to have a seat at the table to bid on it, but let's give it a shot, right? And it was a real estate agent that had connections in Europe. And they said, look, as an American, you don't have a good chance, but if you're interested, let's give it a shot. And we did. We flew over there. We met, with the buyers, and they were pretty clear that they were not interested in selling to American initially. Pretty open about it, actually. And we just kept wearing them down until, okay, it's a real conversation now. And then we really, we got to the finish line, and the guy said, he's like, look, we're inspired by the work that you're doing with your estates in Napa. You're real wine
be in
people.
good hands.
You're not just some big company. That you're real vigneron. You're real. You're really doing the right
That's
thing.
high praise.
Yeah, and that was the
comes
greatest
out,
compliment. That some guy in France had been watching what we were doing in Napa Valley of all places. So we were able to buy Chateau Lescombe.
But here's what boggles
Yeah.
my mind. You friggin' steal Axel Heinz away from Ornellaia.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of another storied winemaker. But the guy's making Tuscan, Super Tuscans, and
So-
you're bringing up, which
well-
is not better Super Tuscans than Sangiovese.
So people know him for the guy who really built Ornellaia in Maceto over the last 20 years. But he got to start in Bordeaux. So he was
did.
the winemaker at La Dominique in Saint-Emilion
I didn't-
prior to coming to Ornellaia. And what people know is Ornellaia has a history of having Bordelais. So Thomas Drew, that now runs Chateau Palmer, was at Ornellaia before Axel. So now they're both back in Margaux, right next to each other.
Oh,
because
nice.
Palmer's right next to Lescombe. And that was for us a massive win because we knew that we were not going to be able to manage a Bordeaux chateau from Napa. And I'm not moving to Bordeaux. I spent a week there every month for almost a year until we got the right person. And when we knew that Axel was
You don't have to
interested,
do that now as much.
no,
right?
no, I'm only there a few times a year.
It's running the way.
And I knew that Axel knew how to do it. What am I going to tell Axel Heinz about winemaking, farming? Nothing. And I knew that we would just discuss the
He
vision
was
of what we wanted to do.
excited to
Yeah.
make the move.
But he was excited about working in an environment where he wasn't micromanaged.
Right.
It
It seems
was
like
just
Frescobaldi, big
Yes,
company.
yes.
Not that
And-
Frescobaldi's a bad guy, just different
it's-
environment.
it is,
and
and it's a big company.
You know.
And we said, no, this is going to be your project. And we talked about our vision, we want it, and he's just gone to work, and he's
What
done an
was his
incredible
first
job.
vintage? Is there one?
A 23 really. So 22 we didn't make, but we finished the élevage and blended. 23, which we're very happy with those wines. We did. We made a big decision that year to decrease the quantity of Grand Vin by 50% to make sure that those wines were moving in a direction we wanted them to. 23 was full farming winemaking Axel.
Um, what was the farming? Bordeaux's not famous for
No,
organics
they're
and
not.
biodynamic. Are you
No.
moving towards that there?
Yeah, so we've gotten up to, I think, 40% of the vineyards are organic now. It's much
with
more
an intention.
yes, it's much more difficult to do,
No, I know.
right? There is, I mean, the mildew pressure there is something. It's when now I go back to Napa, when they talk about mildew, I go, you don't know mildew. You just don't
Right.
know mildew. You go to Bordeaux and it's really hard. So I understand why people are really hesitant to move to organics and stuff, because what happens is the amount you have to spray is insane. You have to ask the question is that actually now as environmentally responsible?
Yeah,
And it's a philosophical question.
Is there any benefit? And the answer may be obvious, but is there any benefit for like a good independent winery to go under the umbrella of like an LWE? Is it just they get the resources, they get a vision?
You mean for like a Napa estate?
Anybody you're looking at that's independent or family or whatever.
I would say
like my friend Dan Petrosky sold the Gallo.
Yes, he did. Yeah,
that was an interesting thing.
Dan's a good friend. So,
yeah.
I think that there is, once you get to a certain size of sales team, and you have started to really navigate the world of wholesale with distribution, which is, as we know, gotten more and more consolidated. In 1995, there were 3,000 distributors in the U.S. There's 1,000 now. So you have to really understand what you're doing out there, or you get eaten alive. And
so, what I'm hearing, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, is that there are certain elements of what you could do. A lot of it sounds like business infrastructure that really will help an operation like that if they're making good wines.
Yeah, and
here's exposure, distribution, expertise.
Yeah,
that's it. And we've talked about your mindset that leave them alone, let them do their thing. So that is, but that's not the case for every company.
No, with our estates that we own, I'm really hands on, especially when we're talking about blends and things like this, because I think that we often forget that the philosophies of what you do in the vineyard and the winery are really critical to producing the wines that you want to produce. But ultimately, people buy wine, not philosophies. The wine has to be great, and not good, great. And I made that very clear on winemakers. I have no interest in making good wine.
Probably have 10 more wineries if that was the definition.
Yeah, I have no interest in making good wine. The world's filled with it.
Yeah.
I want to make great wine. And so I'm very hands-on with the blending of what we're doing, because I have to be very concerned with what our guests, what our sommeliers, what people in the restaurant are drinking, right? Because that's the proof of the pudding.
That's real world.
It's what matters in the end.
Your kind of wine. All right, couple things. I got to get you out of here soon because you have commitments. I got to do the wine list. We have to spend a few minutes on Trailside, the weekly wine sip. But one last thing. I mean, you're a pretty measured guy. We figured out early on, coming from a tough neighborhood, you were smart. It turns out your parents were smart too. Kind of low key, a little intensity. Here's the part I don't get. Where did the ego come from that you had to do a CNN special? I mean, what you're not still doing it, right?
No. I did it.
I mean, what was that? You needed that? That's your alter ego? And I'm busting your balls.
Yeah, I know.
It was good, but where'd that come from?
I just, I think it was coming from where I came from, understanding, I think, how delicate life is, how finite it is. I think maybe 6 years ago, decided I was going to live a full life. I do as much as I possibly could, because the people that I admired the most were people who were often involved in a lot of really random things, but they were passionate people. And I look at their lives and I go, that person lived a full life. They did as much as they could with the life they were given. And when the opportunity came, I didn't go out searching for it, by the way. It came to me. And I just said, yes, right? And Maya told me, why are you doing this? And I said, because it's an interesting thing
Maya
to do.
Are not crazy.
No, my wife thinks I'm crazy, knows that I'm crazy, because I think I am most times. And I said, because it just sounds like a really interesting thing to do. And that was it. There was no grand plan.
I like the fact that they came to you, and I totally get with a guy like you that what it is and what it will expose you and the experience is just, it gives you more.
Well, the ethos was that I see a direct connection between every sort of cultural pillar that we're all involved in: food, wine, music, art, sports, religion. They're all intertwined. All of them are all connected.
Yeah.
And I try to live a life where I do connect through those things. We do it at the wineries. We're bringing in artists to do activations at our wineries. We're bringing in musicians. We're bringing all these cultural pillars together
Beyond what's in the glass.
It makes it because wine is not just about wine. It's about connecting, right? I always tell people, like, a bottle of wine is 750 milliliters. Yes, can I drink a whole bottle of wine? Of course. Is that bottle of wine much better if I can share it with a couple more people? Absolutely. So it's
that's really what it's all about.
Always.
And then, if you're into partying, it's a social lubricant.
Do you want to know something that's really interesting? My wife was flabbergasted by this. I've been in wine since I was 23. I'm 40 now. Last year was the first time in my entire life I sat in my house and had a glass of wine by myself. I hate drinking wine by myself. I gained very little.
Wait, you didn't mind it, though?
I never did it. I don't like doing it.
You did it and still don't like it?
No.
Because it's a wasted opportunity.
To connect. I grew up in a big family in a house with tons of people. That's my connection with the world. I don't like drinking wine by myself.
Church community.
I don't even go to a bar and have a glass of wine. I have a cocktail. Wine to me is to be shared.
So that's a good way to end the interview part, because I totally agree with that. That wine is about sharing. It's about the culture of the wine. It's about the people. It's about the farms. And I think we talked a little about all of that. All right, we got to do our wine list. I'm begging you to be short and succinct on these answers. This is the part where you just got to give me answers. We'll spread it out a little on the trail side. 5 questions, same 5 questions I've asked everyone.
Okay.
You're my 297th. We've done almost 300 of these. I post these.
Mm-hmm.
People sit here and go, this is a cool guy. What's he drinking? So this is the part. What are you drinking now? What's in the fridge? What, besides tasting for work?
Yeah.
What do you like? You and Maya are going out to dinner because you don't drink alone. What are you drinking? What's in the fridge?
What I've been, I know it's a little esoteric, deeply excited about is aged Austrian Gruner Veltliner.
Okay, that's a first.
10 plus years. And I've been collecting it for a while.
Can you give me some producers?
Of course. Imre Knoll, FX Pickler. I love that old school botryticized like Herzbergers. The Honeyvogel is one of my favorite wines in the world. I think that Gruner Veltliner in the right vineyard, in the right hands, is one of the great white wines of the world.
So I love that answer. Is it true that Psalms love Riesling and wines from those areas more than other people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
All right. Second question. You are perfect for this. It's the goofiest question on the list. Your favorite wine and food pairing. Not what you and I think is the classic.
Yeah.
And you obviously won't or don't eat it every week, 9 months.
No.
But what as a wine and a food guy, what works for you?
I'll tell you this because this is a wine that I don't really drink very often, but with food, it makes absolute sense, which is white Northern Rhone. I almost never reach for it. I was at Chez Pic in France, in Valence, and the Somme made fun of me for not drinking those wines. I don't drink highly alcoholic wines. And the chef brought out Brie de Meaux, whipped with vanilla.
I don't know what Brie de Meaux is.
It's the greatest brie.
Oh, brie.
Brie cheese.
Okay. But they took the brie and whipped it.
Whipped it in a Vitamix, and then added vanilla with just warm brioche. With that wine, you understand why it's meant to go together, and it blew my mind.
So first time anyone's given that in, so you can imagine that would be
because it was important to me.
The Northern White, what are the grapes?
Marsanne, Roussanne, or Viognier. So this was an Hermitage Blanc that I have from Shop.
What are the characteristics? Is it florally?
It can be, but they're really rich, opulent, nutty.
Is the mouthfeel oily or not necessarily?
It is. It doesn't have a whole lot of acidity often.
Okay.
They're very powerful wines.
A perfect matchup with that.
Yes.
All right. Third question. You should be as good as this as anyone too. the question is, and I'll disclaim it for a second, your favorite wine restaurant and or bar. Now, I'm not asking you to give me 1, 2, 3. I'm just asking you to give me suggestions of places that have great selection, great vibe, good people. And the idea is just throw a few at me, because I don't want people, come up to you and say, hey, I heard that podcast. You didn't mention my restaurant. You didn't, because you only threw out a few ideas. What you think anywhere in the world?
So on the high end, I'll tell you is I'm a bit of an old soul. I don't like loud places.
Okay. So that's part of the environment.
I don't like it.
What fits that?
To me, and I've gone to this restaurant every couple of years when I'm in Paris, is La Tour d'Argent.
Classic.
My God. I was just there a month ago and I had a dinner.
What wines did you have?
So I drank 1987 Comte Lafon Merceau Genevière. We drank a magnum of 85 Domaine de Monty Rougien, which is my favorite wine they make from the Basse Rougien. We drank, because they had it on the list, in 05 Chateau Lascombe, because that's now the home wine.
To taste that.
And then we had a magnum of 1988 Biacart Simon Blanc de Blanc. Brilliant.
Wait, what's the name of it?
Biacart Simon Champagne.
Oh.
The Blanc de Blanc.
All right. So give me Le Tour d'Argent. Give me 1 or 2 other places.
I also will tell you I'm a homebody, so I'm in the house a lot.
Me too.
In my community in Napa, I really enjoy going to Compline. It's a little wine bar. I was run
fairly
by
new, like less than 10 years old, right?
Because they a couple things I really like. One is they have a little bottle shop in the front where you can grab a bottle and go. They have an incredible wine by the glass list, and they do educational flights, which are really fun to try a number of things. I think a great wine bar is fun but educational as well, and that's just in my community. What I have next to me.
One other thing. Does anything in New York ring your bell?
Yeah, but I always get sort of like pulled around in New York. And,
right. It's more about we're taking you with distributor or whatever.
Yeah. And what I would say is like New York, because you can walk everywhere. Most places I walk around New York. I usually don't.
Me too.
There are so many great wine bars and wine restaurants in this
last 5 years. That's maybe
it's
double.
Insane. And the youthful energy
There's
here.
Shit out there you haven't even heard of.
Yeah. The only thing is I go to those wine bars, especially if they're sort of like young hipster bars. I always tell the Sam, I go, I want to drink something really great. If it's some cool, natty producer and it's a little screwed up, I go, I think you should pour what you want to pour, but I'm not interested in drinking that. I want classical wines.
Makes sense.
Yes.
All right, so we'll leave it at that. 4th question. Favorite all-time wine. When I initially structured the question, it was, what is the rarest, most expensive wine you ever tasted? Don't care about that anymore.
Yes, I think that's
relevant. Talk to me about the wine that was the gateway wine, that opened up your eyes, that changed the way you thought about wine, that you still think of.
Yeah, I would say I was really honored to host Marcel Dice for lunch when I was in D.C., and the time that I spent with him to this day has a major impact on me, because he had a vision. He kept saying the same thing over and over again. I would ask him a question. I didn't like the answer, so I'd ask it a different way, the answer. And tasting through Mamberg, Schonenberg, Altenberg to Bergheim, and tasting through 10-year verticals of those wines, he would just say, everything I have to say is in the wines. And I would say, what's the varietal? He goes, irrelevant.
Wow.
Irrelevant.
What an approach.
Man, it was this whole thing of like, terroir is real. It's a real thing. And he goes, I blend different varietals, all irrelevant. The place. Mamberg is salty. It's this. And you think it's BS a lot of times, but you go through that with him, it's a real thing. And I think it really inspires the work we do. It's like it's a real thing.
That's a good answer. Nobody's ever given me that. All right, here's the 5th question, final question. And this one is a tough one for you.
Okay.
When I say favorite wine and food pairing, I mean,
Sure.
I ask my guests, and it's a selfish question because my kids are in their late 20s, early 30s, and they don't want to bring crappy wine to a party or get a crappy gift. So they're not spending $50, $60.
Yeah.
But they ain't buying supermarket wine. Recommend to me the best wines, and it could be region, like a Muscadet, in acres, whatever, 15, 20, $22 retail.
Sure.
Where's the bang for the buck white?
Yeah.
Where's the bang for the buck red?
I'll give you two wines, and these are honest because I get asked this all the time, actually. White wine, Village Chablis. So we import La Chablisienne into the U.S., and I'll say this, they're Village Chablis, and it's probably $14.99. Fantastic bottle of wine. For the red, I don't think there is a greater value bottle of wine in the world than Etienne Guigal Côte d'Aron.
Great maker, great region,
Hyper consistent quality.
good value in that region.
I'm going to tell you something. It is a fantastic bottle of wine for, I think it's probably $8.99.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yes.
That's perfect. You handle that with such ease that you calm me down on the CNN question. I appreciate that. All right, we got to wrap up. So every week we do a thing called the weekly wine sip. Taste a different wine. It makes 0 sense not to have a maker in and not sit here and discuss their wines. So in a way, we save the best for last. We are tasting, and I'm going to throw it over to you eventually. We are tasting the 2022 Trailside Vineyard, Napa Valley. This is in Rutherford.
Yeah, right on the Rutherford bench on the east side.
Here's the setup. So this is like this storied vineyard. You've seen it on Heights bottles in the old days, right?
Yeah.
It's a California Cabernet, but we talked about, how Carlton, approaches making wine and growing wine and all that. But this wine happens to be made by two Pinot Noir makers.
Yeah.
Does Nico Cuevo still make this?
Yeah, he made the 22 through.
So I'm drinking a Napa Cab by Pinot Noir makers. So talk to me about this wine.
Yeah, so Trailside the Vineyard was originally owned by Michael Robbins, who started Spring Mountain Winery. So all the wines from Spring Mountain Winery, all the way through the 80s, came from Rutherford, from this vineyard. He started selling parcels to Joe Heights in the 80s, but then the other big chunk of the vineyard he sold to Treasury at the time, ended up with Diageo and so forth, and we were able to buy that last parcel in 2019. So we brought the whole vineyard back together. We hired Brennan Quigley, who's a really well-known geologist, to do a soil study, and it showed us we have 8 very distinct different soils in the vineyard. So we did an overlay of the block map, and we started to just change how we were farming. We were now no longer farming in these perfect little squares. We were farming along the geological lines, and it changed. You could see the vineyard visually change. And we brought in a small amount of fruit from each soil type, and we fermented it separately. That was the point I brought Jeremy in. I've known Jeremy since I was a young sommelier. Always admired and loved the wines that him and his family made.
Younger guy,
Jeremy's
second generation.
Yeah, so his father, Jacques Sayce, developed Domaine du Jacques, and Jeremy took over, I think in 06, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong about that. And I always not only admired the wines, but Jeremy's sensibility. He's a very open-minded guy, which is very rare for Burgundy. And I brought him over, and I just sort of tasted him what we were doing just to get his input, because we were making him in a very particular style. And I said, hey, look, I would love your insight, how we can do this better. I don't know what we're going to do at this point, but this is a new concept for Napa, and I want to keep doing it. And he came in with these ideas of, because I said to him, I said, what if no one ever told you how Cabernet was supposed to be made?
Right.
And you did what you think is the best for each one of these soil types and climats. So he brought in the idea of experimenting with submerged cap fermentation, which is often used in Barolo and Barbaresco. He spends a lot of time in Barolo, and then bringing in some stem inclusion. So we started trialing 5, 10, 15, 20% stem inclusion on different blocks.
What percentage of well-known Napa wines do stem inclusion?
0.
Right. I wasn't sure if it was.
Now you're starting to see some sort of experiment with it, but no one was doing it at the time. Submerged cap fermentation, definitely not. I mean, we had lots here that were submerged cap fermentation for 80 days, but never disturbed. But we were farming with very low yields, which allowed us to get maturity and phenolic maturity at much lower bricks. So this wine is 13.1 alcohol.
Pretty good.
But this is not an anemic wine. This is not a wine that tastes like it's missing anything.
No.
It's phenolically mature, great mid palate. but
Tell me
aromatically.
when you say phenolically mature,
So
what are
we're
phenolics?
talking about the maturity cycle that the vine goes through to soften the skin, soften the tannins. We're getting lignified brown stems and seeds, which gives you more texture in the wine, more flavor,
Savory,
softer
or-
tannins, and much more savory as well. So what we do is we take all different 8 ferments, and at the end we do a blend that we think expresses the ranch well. And if you smell this wine, it is such a highly aromatic wine.
Let's start. So
Yeah.
color is, beautiful, deep purple.
But that deep purple only comes from mature fruit. So if I pick this premature, you wouldn't have this dark color, because the color in the Cabernet Sauvignon comes from having a good amount of sun contact, but going through the
That's interesting.
phenolic development process.
'Cause you take
But to
it
have
for
a
granted.
wine at that color at 13.1 proves I'm not
I'm
picking
glad
early.
you kind of.
People say, "Are you picking early?" No, I'm not picking early. I'm
So the
farming
note-
for lower bricks.
Right. The nose is crazy. I suck
It's
at
nuts.
descriptors, but what is that?
Well,
what am
what
I
we're doing
smelling?
is we're getting a face of Cabernet that is almost never seen, which is the aromatic complexity of Cabernet, right? It's super floral, all those like violets and roses, and you do get a bit of that vegetal stimmy component, but
Definitely vegetable
but it's on the savory side. It's not
Definitely
bell pepper.
savory.
It's like
No,
sage.
I didn't think
Yeah,
of bella green pepper.
It's sage. It's oregano.
But
you know,
here's what I get. You always talk deep dark fruits. I'm getting like more like plum, which is
Yes.
richer than
Mhm.
currant or whatever.
that's correct.
a little brighter.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Which are really classical descriptors. Everything we're saying here are classical descriptors of very old Bordeaux. When we think of Bordeaux that we love from the 60s, that classical style, more elegant but super aromatic, this is what we're thinking. But it's a new approach to Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon that we're head over heels in love with.
It's delicious. So, mouthfeel. It's people expect Napa this sort of cloying cough syrup. This is a beautiful mouthfeel. It's like a nice medium. On the palate, we talked about on the nose a lot of things. What's going on with the palate? Does a lot
So
of that
structurally,
translate?
what we're looking at is good bright acidity. Red wines age on acidity. It's just a fact, right? You have an acidity, the wines will fall apart. The fruit is fresh, never overripe or raisinated. I think black and red fruits, which I think Cabernet well made should have black and red fruits. The tannic structure is present, but it's soft, silky tannins.
Yes.
But again, the finish. Great wines are defined by their finish. I taste the wine, I swallow it. How long am I tasting this wine? That's really a mark of quality. You can only get that with low yields, proper vinification. As I'm talking, I'm still tasting this wine. It's going, but it's not heavy. So when we talk about great wines, make this clear distinction. There's density and there's fatness. You can make a wine really fat that has almost no density.
No fatness here.
I want density of flavor, but I want length and I want freshness of acidity.
You got it. Talk to me about putting this up with foods.
So I think, again, we always think of like,
Bloody steak.
it is a great, first I love great grass-fed steak. This is fantastic for that. But I think lamb as well, that sort of herbaceous component works really, really well with lamb. I think that it's
Caviar.
not, duck, venison. I think roasted chicken, depending on the sauce. Sauce is really critical in those things.
Those are good ones. I have a curiosity. So I switched to grass-fed many, many years ago.
Yes.
Did you bring up grass-fed because it has characteristics that other steaks don't?
Correct. So we
What
actually
are they? I'm
raise
curious.
cattle on our ranches as well. Black Angus that we use for our biodynamic farming. But we harvest the cows and we have the beef. We sell it to restaurants, so forth. It tastes nothing like commercially corn-fed raised beef. Corn-fed beef is sweet.
I know that, but
Like,
what
because
isn't there? What's there? What's
Well,
the difference?
Corn makes beef taste sweet, makes it fattier.
Right. Cows can't digest.
No, grass.
That's why they get sick.
Grass makes beef lean more towards lamb characteristic of a big gamier grass here. The flavor is much more developed. It's much more it tastes more like what you associate with red meat than corn-fed beef. And I almost exclusively eat grass-fed beef now.
You know what I didn't realize? I don't see, or I haven't noticed. Do they dry age grass-fed? Are there?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So
But I mean,
I learned a lot about this
I don't
with
see
now
this
like
in
overseas
restaurants.
cows.
I see dry
Yeah.
aged like Snake River
Yeah.
and Allen Brown. I never see dry aged.
You do, yeah, and it's actually really great because grass-fed beef naturally will be a little less tender than corn-fed because the fat content's different. So
Right.
Dry aging actually helps denature those proteins and soften the meat quite a bit.
All right, gotta wrap up. Let me do a quick wrap up, get some info from you, and I got to send you on your way. You're closer to where you have to be time-wise
Great.
Than you thought you were going to be, because this thing ran on. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Listen to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your pods. If you like the pod, please subscribe and you'll get the pod delivered to you every week. Leave a review if you like it. Follow us on Instagram at @SBenRuby, on X @BenRuby. You can always use the hashtag #TheGrapeNation to find us on both. We're on Facebook at The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we'll post Carlton's wine list, those great answers. And on the weekly wine sip, I will post the wines that we tasted today on our social media sites. Carlton, if we want to learn more about, and I think people are going to move towards individual wines.
Yeah.
What do we do?
So you can, if you actually go to lawrencewineestates.com, you can go to, it'll see all of our wineries. You can click and go straight to their websites.
Right.
It has all of them listed.
And each one has an independent site,
Yep.
not a Lawrence,
Yep.
little tab or whatever. What about social media? You personally and Lawrence.
Yeah, so it's mine is Carlton McCoy. All the wineries have their own Instagram. We also have just one for Lawrence
So when
Wine
you go to the
Estates.
site, you'll see.
Yeah,
But like, let's take Burgess. If you go to Instagram and type
you just have
you're
Burgess
going to
there.
see
Yes,
Burgess
every
pop
brand.
up and all.
Yes, every estate,
Because they're
including Chatelesco.
All right, I want to thank our guest Carlton McCoy. It's good to sit with him
Thank you. It was an honor.
in New York. Thank you to our engineer Armin and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to the Grape Nation before my device ran out of battery. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.